everyone, welcome back to my class. This is Ahle. I hope you all are good. In the last session we have seen about the external structure of heart, that it is four chambered, two atrium will be present and the two ventricles are present in our heart. And we have also seen the outer covering that is made up of three important layers, and that were epicardium, myocardium and endocardium. These were the layers or the outer covering of our heart. Now, based on its function, based on the initiation of a heartbeat, the heart is divided into, or it is classified into two main types. One is neurogenic and the other one is myogenic. Neurogenic heart is a heart in which initiation of heartbeat can be done by the neurons. When the neurons give signals to the heart, at that time only they can contract their muscles and the heartbeat can start. But this type of neurogenic heart is found in many of the invertebrates. Whereas myogenic heart is a type of heart that is present in vertebrates. So this type of heart is present in human beings. Human beings are the vertebrates. Mutagenic heart means this heart shows, it starts its heartbeat not because of the neuron signals, but the muscles which are present in our heart, they contract because of the other muscles which are specialized. Some specialized muscles are also present in our heart that we are going to discuss later. So because of this, the other muscles can contract, and due to the contraction of muscles, the initiation of a heartbeat can be seen in case of myogenic heart. So mutagenic heart is a heart which is present in the human beings. Now we are going to see the internal structure of heart. We have seen that two atria and two ventricles are present in our heart, right? So this is our right atrium, this is our right ventricle. Here left atrium and this one is our left ventricle. This is how our heart is four chambered. Let us see what are the things that are present inside our heart. We know that outside the heart, the thick covering can be seen, and that covering is called as pericardium. One more covering can be seen in the ventricle region, and that covering is made up of irregular muscles. It doesn't made up of smooth muscles. Smooth muscles are not present. And this layer is called as myocardium. Below the epicardium, a layer is present which is made up of many muscles. Thick muscles are present in this layer which is termed as myocardium. So this layer is made up of irregular shaped muscles. So here we can see the columns of muscles in the layer myocardium, which is specially present in the ventricle region, right? So the atrium and ventricle is present. From the atrium, the blood flows into the ventricles, right? So due to the contraction of atrium, the blood which is present in the atrium, it can goes down into the ventricles. So once the blood moves into the ventricles, it cannot flow back. How? Why it cannot flow back into the atrium once it reaches the ventricle? Because of the opening. Here a valve is present in between the atrium and ventricle. A valve is present which shows three door-like structures. So here three doors are present which flows the blood only in one direction. Once the blood reaches into the ventricle, it shuts down and does not allow the blood to flow back into the atrium, and we call this opening in between the atrium and ventricle as tricuspid valve. Likewise, when you see the left atrium and left ventricle, in between this left atrium and left ventricle, one opening is found again, but here only two doors are present to transfer the blood from the atrium into the ventricle, and that door, that opening which is found in between the left atrium and left ventricle is called as bicuspid valve. So bicuspid valve can be called by another name, that is mitral valve. So two atriums and two ventricles are present. Deoxygenated blood is collected from the different parts of our body through different blood vessels, right? And then the deoxygenated blood on the contraction of atrium can be transferred into the right ventricle. Once the blood reaches into the right ventricle, it cannot flow back because of the presence of a valve called tricuspid valve. Likewise, left atrium receives oxygenated blood, and this oxygenated blood can move into the left ventricle by the opening of a valve called bicuspid valve. Once the oxygenated blood enters into the left ventricle, this valve closes, and due to the closing of this valve, the blood cannot flow back into the left atrium. This is how the blood flow in one direction, and it is maintained by the valves like tricuspid valve and bicuspid valve, which are present in between the atrium and ventricle. Now, once the blood reaches into the ventricle, it is pumped to the different blood vessels. So, the deoxygenated blood from the ventricle, it is carried by the arteries. Firstly, we'll see the difference between arteries and veins. Arteries are the blood vessels that are found in our heart, and the arteries which are present in our heart, they are responsible to take the blood away from the heart. Whenever the blood is taken away from the heart, that function is carried out by the blood vessels called arteries. But when the blood has to come into the heart, then the blood can be transferred into the heart through blood vessels called veins. So, veins are the blood vessels that are responsible to take the blood into the heart, and arteries are the blood vessels that takes the blood away from the heart. From the right ventricle, deoxygenated blood is collected by the artery, and that deoxygenated blood is transferred to the lungs for the process of oxygenation. So, from the ventricle, when it enters into the arteries, here the blood flows back into the ventricles, but here also in between the ventricle and artery, you can see the presence of a valve. A special valve is present in between the ventricle and the blood vessels. Similarly, in between the left ventricle and the blood vessels, a valve is present to prevent the backflow of the blood. These valves are called as semilunar valves. The valves which are present in between the ventricles and the blood vessels to prevent the backflow of the blood, these valves are called as semilunar valves. So, here in the heart, a layer is present which is called as myocardium, and it is made up of thick muscles. So, these muscles, they are found in columns. Columns of muscles are present which are very thick, and over these cells, you can find some specialized cells which are present in this way. So, the column of muscles which are found in the layer myocardium, they are named as trabeculae carneae, and over this trabeculae carneae, some specialized muscles are present, and these specialized muscles are termed as papillary muscles. The opening and the closing of the tricuspid and the bicuspid valve can be done in a smooth manner because of the presence of some thread-like structure in between the papillary muscles and these valves. The thread-like structures are found. Thin fiber-like structures are found in between the papillary muscles and valves. So, these thread-like structure can help in closing and opening these valves. So, the opening and the closing of this valve, once the valve closes, due to the blood pressure, it can open again and the blood can flow back into the atrium, but this backflow of the blood can be prevented because of these thread-like structures. They do not allow these valves to open when the ventricles get contracted. So, in this way, during the contraction of ventricles, these valves remains closed because of the thread-like structures which are present in between the papillary muscles and tricuspid or bicuspid valves. And these thread-like material is named as chordae tendinae. These are rope-like material is present, holds the valve that enables the valve to remain closed during the contraction of ventricles. This is how the backflow of the blood can be prevented and the circulation can be done in a smooth manner. How the rope-like material is present in between the tricuspid valve and papillary muscles. Likewise, in the left ventricle also you can see the presence of papillary muscles, and these papillary muscles extended into a thread-like or rope-like structures, and that rope-like structure, which are called as chordae tendineae, makes the bicuspid valve to get closes at the time of ventricle contraction. Different structures are present in our heart that enables the heart to function in a proper manner. Let us recall all the parts that are present in the internal structure of the human heart. So here the right atrium is present and right ventricle is present, and between these two chambers a valve is present, and we call that valve as tricuspid valve. Likewise, in the left side, left atrium is present and left ventricle is also present. So this is our left ventricle, and in between the atrium, in between the left atrium and left ventricle, a valve is present, and we call that valve as bicuspid valve. So in this way, in the left side a valve is present which is called as tricuspid valve, in the right side a valve is present which is called as tricuspid valve, and in the left side a valve is present which is called as bicuspid valve. Valve is nothing but an opening which do not allow the blood to flow back into the atrium. So that is called as the valve. So valve is playing an important role in preventing the backflow of the blood from the ventricle into the atrium. Once the blood flows from the atrium into the ventricle, then it cannot flow back into the atrium, and this can be done due to the presence of these two valves. Now, besides these valves, some more also present, and that valves are found in between the ventricle and the different blood vessels, and that valves are called as semilunar valves, which prevent the flow of the blood back into the ventricles. So this is how the different valves are performing their specific function in order to prevent the backflow of the blood, and the blood always flows in one direction due to the presence of these valves. Now, besides these, some muscles are present in the myocardium region, and that muscles are called as trabeculae carneae. Here you can see these muscles are called as trabeculae carneae, and over these muscles some specialized muscles are present which are called as papillary muscles, and these papillary muscles extended and they show some rope-like structures, and that rope-like fibrous type of structures which are present, they are termed as chordae tendineae, and the function of chordae tendineae is to regulate the closing of the bicuspid valve during the contraction of ventricles. When the ventricle contract, at that time from the atrium the blood flows into the ventricles, right? Now the blood pressure is high, obviously the blood has some pressure. Due to that pressure, there may be some chances due to which these valves can get open again and the blood can flow back into the atrium. But to reduce these chances, to prevent the backflow of the blood into the valve even due to the blood pressure, this can be achieved due to the presence of rope-like structures that binds to the valves and make them close, make them shut down during the contraction of ventricles, and that structures are called as chordae tendineae. So these are the different things that are found in the internal structure of the human heart. Now we'll see what are the different arteries and veins that are present. In the beginning, I already explained you that arteries are the blood vessels that always takes the blood away from the heart, and veins are the blood vessels that takes the blood into the heart. So whenever the blood has to come into the heart, they flow through the veins. So here the veins are present. These veins are called as pulmonary veins. These are right pulmonary veins, and the veins which are present towards left side, they are called as left pulmonary veins. These veins collects the deoxygenated blood. Two veins are present which are named as superior vena cava and inferior vena cava. Superior vena cava can also be termed as precaval vein, and inferior vena cava can also be termed as post-caval vein. Pre-caval vein is responsible to collect the deoxygenated blood from our head, and post-caval vein, which is also named as inferior vena cava, it is responsible to collect the deoxygenated blood from the different parts of our body. Once the deoxygenated blood is collected by these two vena cavas, this deoxygenated blood is sent to the right atrium and right ventricle. From the right ventricle, this deoxygenated blood is collected by a specialized artery which is called as pulmonary artery. So here pulmonary artery is present, and this artery is responsible to take the deoxygenated blood from the right ventricle. In this way, from the right ventricle, the deoxygenated blood is collected. It is transferred to the pulmonary artery, and this pulmonary artery takes that deoxygenated blood to the lungs. In the lungs, oxygenation of the blood occurs. After the blood becomes oxygenated, that oxygenated blood is carried by the pulmonary veins. Here the pulmonary veins are present. These veins carry the oxygenated blood from the lungs and gives this blood to the left atrium and left ventricle of the heart, and from the left ventricle the oxygenated blood is transferred to the largest artery which is present, and that artery is named as aorta. So once the oxygenated blood from the left ventricle reaches the aorta, aorta is an artery which is responsible to transport or to circulate that oxygenated blood into the different parts of our body. So the oxygenated blood can be transferred throughout of our body with the help of an artery called aorta, is also called as systemic arc. So pulmonary artery takes the deoxygenated blood from the right atrium and right ventricle. This blood is sent to the lungs. The deoxygenated blood can become oxygenated one. Then from the lungs, oxygenated blood is taken by the pulmonary veins, and these veins collect the oxygenated blood and gives that oxygenated blood to the left atrium and left ventricle. Once the left atrium and left ventricle takes the oxygenated blood, then that oxygenated blood is transferred to the aorta, and aorta is an artery that supplies the oxygenated blood throughout of our body. This is how the heart helps in carrying out the process of circulation, and this is how the internal structure of our heart is designed, with many different parts, many valves are present and many different blood vessels are present, because of which the circulation or the transportation of the blood is possible. So here it's a rough diagram of our heart, where you can find 4 chambers again, 2 atrium and 2 ventricles are present. All the 4 chambers are present in a merged manner, or they are separated? They are present in a separate manner, right? So they are separated by some division. They are divided into 4 chambers, and some space is present in between these chambers, and that division is named by the different terms. The septum, which is present in between 2 atrium, that space is called as interatrial septum, and the space which is found in between 2 ventricles, that septum, that division of the ventricle is termed as interventricular septum, and the space between an atrium and ventricle is termed as atrioventricular septum. So this is how the division is done, by which all these 4 chambers are present in a separate manner. They are not mixes up, they are not merged with each other. There is a space in between 2 atrium, in between 2 ventricles, and also a space in between an atrium and ventricle, and we call that septum by the different names. The space between 2 atrium, interatrial septum; in between 2 ventricles, interventricular septum; and in between an atrium and ventricle, we call that as atrioventricular septum. We have learned that in between the left atrium and left ventricle, a valve is present that is called as bicuspid valve, right? So that valve is found in this place, in atrioventricular septum, And likewise, in between the right atrium and right ventricle, again a valve is found, and we call that valve as tricuspid valve. So the valve is present in the region called atrioventricular septum. So we call that bicuspid and tricuspid valve as atrioventricular valves. So atrioventricular valves means tricuspid valve and bicuspid valve. You might have heard about a term fossa ovalis. What do you mean by this term? In the fetal stage, the fetus, the heart of the fetus, it do not show two separate atrium. This membrane, this lining is not present in the fetal heart. In this way, a space, a hole can be seen in the fetal heart. But as the baby, as the fetus is going to grow, and after the birth of a child, this space gets filled by some tissues, that is by a layer of squamous epithelial tissue, and this is how a depression can be seen. So this is an evidence that in an embryonic stage, a hole is present in between these two atrium. So after the embryo gets matured, after the fetus turns into baby, then the baby will have a depression like this in the right atrium and left atrium, that will be the evidence of a hole. So this depression in the atrium is called as fossa ovalis. I hope it's clear to you. We know that every organ is made up of different cells. So our heart is also made up of different muscle cells. So muscle cells are of three types. One is skeletal muscle, other one is smooth muscle, and the third one is cardiac muscle. Skeletal muscle cells are the muscles that are under our control. I am writing on the board, I am moving my hands here and there. This is under my control. So the hands are made up of skeletal muscle tissue. But some of the muscle cells are present in our body that are not under our control. And that type of muscle tissues are called as smooth muscle cells. And even the muscle cells which are not under our control and that are present in our heart, these type of muscle cells are called as cardiac muscle cells or cardiac muscle tissue. The tissues which are present in our heart that are not under our control, that type of muscle cells are termed as cardiac muscle cells. So our heart is made up of cardiac muscles, and these cardiac muscles are not under our control. They are involuntary in function. And if you see the difference between smooth muscle cells and cardiac muscle cells, then smooth muscle cells are not branched, whereas the cardiac muscle cells are branched in their structure. Like this. If this is one cell, like this, some branches are present. So in this way, the branches are found in their structure. This is one cardiac muscle cell. In this way, the branched muscles are present in our heart. So the heart is made up of cardiac muscles. So when you see the structure of cardiac muscle cells, then this is one branched cell and here is another branched cardiac muscle cell. Now when you see the connection between these two, and one point that we need to remember here is all the cardiac muscle cells are joined together. They do not show any intercellular space in between them. They are joined together and they are compactly arranged. So in between the two cardiac muscle cells, you can find some hole, some gap is present, and that gap is called as gap junction, and this gap junction is present in a space. So the space or a disc-like structure is found in between two cardiac muscle cells, and we call that disc as intercalated disc. This is how the gap junction and the intercalated disc is present in between two cardiac muscle cells, so that the cytoplasm or any other contents that are present in one cell can easily transported into the another one, and from the another into the first one it can be easily transported. The exchange of material can be done in an easy manner due to the presence of gap junction and intercalated disc between two cardiac muscles. So our heart is made up of cardiac muscle cells, and this is about the structure of the cardiac muscle cells. That's all for today. Meet you in next class. Thank you.